Hey everyone, Genome here for yet another episode of Was It Good? This time we're going to kind of take a walk back to the early 80s, a time when special effects were king, plots were thin, and people tried different things in movies. It was kind of an experimental phase, if you will. The floodgates were open a bit, so things got pretty creative back in the 80s, especially the earlier parts of it. Stuff that I don't think anyone would try today. But anyway, let's get down to it. The movie in question is none other than 1981's An American Werewolf in London. This movie was written and directed by John Landis. Now, who is John Landis, in case you don't know? Well, he's directed a lot of very, very big movies. For example, he directed Animal House, The Blues Brothers, Trading Places, Three Amigos, Coming to America, and even some Michael Jackson videos. I think Thriller was one of them, and the other one was Black and White. So basically, some of Michael Jackson's biggest videos as well. Even with all of those accolades and that much commercial success, this is actually John Landis' favorite movie that he ever did, which speaks a lot to the quality and care that actually went into it. So what is the movie about? So the premise goes like this, and spoiler alerts for those who haven't seen it, you might want to stop watching now because I want to ruin it for you. But two American backpackers going through the Welsh countryside, and they're getting rained on, it's getting cold, so they take cover in this little small town inn, right? And you can tell everyone has lived there their whole life, and this is basically the only form of entertainment in the town. So basically the whole town of 20 people are in this place, as I'm sure they are every other night. So they wander in, make some off-the-cuff remarks, make friends quickly, and then lose them just as fast. And basically they run out of town on a rail. And this kind of segues into the werewolf attack. Werewolf attacks both the guys after stalking for quite a while. And it's kind of tense too. And the direction these guys were given was really good because they're made out to be real flippant, happy-go-lucky, carefree two guys just out there, enjoying themselves, and they don't seem to have a mean bone in their body. And then they're pushed out in the dark, in the dead of night, in the cold and the fog, into these, rolling English moors, and they get lost out there, and they get ambushed by the werewolf, and after stalking for a while, it attacks, kills the one friend, and then mauls the other one. The nice little touch they threw in here, especially with this scene, is it shows how close these two guys were as friends. Because first, David, who's the main character, he runs away when the wolf attacks. It's killing his friends, tearing them to shreds over there. And he does what most people will do if they're honest with themselves in a situation like that. He hauls ass and runs away, right? And he realized what he's doing back there. He hears his best friend screaming, and the wolf just ripping him up, and then he turns around and goes back to try to help. Well, this avails him nothing, and it gets him attacked as well. Lucky for him, the townspeople show up, kill the bad guy, aka Wolfman, and we wake up now with David a month later in the hospital. A nice, proper English hospital where everything is neat and orderly, and there's definitely a very strict hierarchy. And from then on out, the movie goes through him trying to come to grips with what happened. He seems to remember what's going on, and in some questionable logic, decides to tell everyone around what actually happened, even though the police, they're no longer interested in what's going on. They consider the matter closed. So, and they're gonna let him walk out of there, but he keeps bringing up, my best friend got killed by a werewolf, and of course, everyone thinks he's nuts. And of course, his behavior in the hospital gets stranger and stranger. He has recurring nightmares that wake him up, and these are some really odd sequences. You'll have him running naked through the countryside and killing a deer with his bare hands, and tearing it apart with his teeth in human form. This is not in his werewolf form or anything, which he hasn't hit yet. And there's even a scene where a bunch of Nazis come in, Nazi ghouls, whatever these things are, come in and kind of slaughter him and his whole family. But I'm not too sure about that scene. But yeah, so he's obviously not compos mentis, and but yet somehow he endears himself to a very attractive British nurse who quickly brings him back to her flat to let him stay because he has nowhere else to go, and proceeds to kind of fall for the guy. She leaves for work. He transforms, I think the very next night, and goes out on a little rampage, unbeknownst to him, and kills a bunch of folks, and wakes up in the zoo. So, and it's kind of a funny scene, actually, but he comes back, he reads the paper, he finds out what's going on, he puts two and two together, and realizes that, yeah, this really is me. And part of what leads him to believe that's actually him is his friend, poor Jack Goodman. He's the best friend that died at the beginning of the movie. He keeps coming back in worsening stages of decomposition, telling him since he was murdered by an unnatural beast, he's cursed to walk the earth forever until the line of the beast is dead. So basically, the werewolf that attacked David at the beginning of the movie has transferred his wolfiness to David, and he's going to become a werewolf, so he's part of that line, kind of keeping with the whole lore of werewolves. So he figures it out. He wants to try to get himself locked up so he can't hurt anybody, but the British are just too polite. They won't lock him up no matter what he says. And that's actually a kind of a funny scene. He's out, in some touristy spots, and he's trying to piss off a Bobby enough to arrest him. And Bobby just won't do it, But in any case, no one listens. He goes, turns again, kills a slew of people this time because he's trapped in a movie theater. And eventually the British SWAT shows up and puts an end to him. And that's basically the end. The line dies with him. So that's basically the whole movie in a nutshell. And there's a lot more to it than that, somewhat. But on the other hand, there really isn't. It's a very, very simple story. This is not War and Peace, folks. You're not going to have any trouble keeping up with who's who and what character motivations are. So, okay, this movie is known for its special effects. This was the first movie to actually earn an Academy Award for special effects. And the man responsible for most of these effects was Rick Baker. And Rick Baker also did The Howling. He did special effects in that too, which was kind of an offshoot for this movie, while this movie was, sitting in production hell and not getting made. Rick Baker got impatient. But in fact, there were some disagreements too between Landis and Baker on the design of the werewolf. Baker wanted it to be an upright bipedal thing, think like the underworld lichens, walking around on 2 feet, or the Howling. And Landis wanted more of the four-legged variety, walks around on 4 legs like a real wolf would, But, a wolf that's the size of a small bear. This thing is big. And ultimately, Landis won out in his design choice, and I think it was a good one. It was nice to see something different, and it really gave the creature a more bestial look. It looked more intimidating, it looked more primal, so I think it was a really good decision on his part to make it as he did. So we can talk about the characters. There's only really 4 main characters in this movie, and that's David Kessler, played by David Naughton. Nurse Price, played by Jenny Agutter. Jack Goodman, played by Griffin Dunn. And Dr. Hirsch, played by John Woodvine. So most of the other people in this movie are very, very small bit parts. I think there's a bumbling detective that has 5 minutes of screen time in there too, along with his more astute partner. But the main focus of this movie is definitely on David Kessler and his transformation from good-natured old American boy to a rampaging beast, and the self-realization that comes with the whole transition he goes through. David Naughton does a real good job with the part, as well as Griffin Dunn, who plays his best friend Jack, the one who gets killed at the beginning of the movie. I will say that I know that Landis' goal for this was to make a horror movie with comedy elements. Some people do criticize that it's a horror comedy or a comedy horror film, which is fairly accurate. Even while David is questioning his own sanity, and then finally realizes that he's not really insane, this is really happening to him, he still doesn't have too many, I don't know what the word for it, introspective moments where he takes on he realizes the gravity of the situation. He's very quick to make a joke, even towards the end, even while transforming into a wolf, which is shown to be an incredibly painful process. He's still making jokes, you know? So that part can come off a little bit, I don't know, overly comedic, possibly. Jack, his best friend, who keeps haunting him in these visions that he's having, basically nightmares, or in daymares, if you say, because he's seeing him while he's awake. He's constantly in a good mood and pleasant and a little bit joking, even as he's rotting away into a zombie-looking corpse, you know, towards the end. He starts out fresh, and then they show him through different phases of decomposition as, you know, the days go by. So both those guys do a good job with it, and from the beginning of the movie, at least, you can kind of tell they were friends. You know, they do play that role well, and you think they've grown up together, and none of their conversation seems too forced, even though sometimes it's obviously written dialogue. You know, some people just don't talk that perfectly. But anyway, Nurse Price, the love interest, and probably the person with the second most airtime in this movie, she's well played. Once again, maybe it's a European thing, but I find it a little hard to believe that, you know, she invites this guy who's obviously, you know, having a breakdown in the hospital back to stay with her so quickly. But, you know, well, that's the wonder of film, I guess. But she does a good job with her role, and she definitely seems very caring. They definitely portray her to have loads of empathy, and she pulls that off well. Actually, my favorite character in this movie is the straight man, Dr. Hirsch. John Woodvine, he plays this role real well, I think, and I would like to have seen a little more of him in this. It goes from this very, you know, crusty, stodgy, aloof doctor, and he kind of transitions into a cut-rate Clouseau by investigating what happened to David in this small town. And I like that scene a lot when he's in there. He plays that well. You think he could really play a detective in a full-blown role rather than a doctor playing detective in this movie. But I really like his role. He has a perfect look for it. And he definitely keeps in character as an administrator in the hospital. And he has no problem showing that, you know, he's the one in charge of what's going on around there. And then he seems a little out of his element when he goes somewhere where he's not, like that little bar in the countryside. But anyway, he does a real good job with his role. So there's a lot of things I like about this movie and a few things I don't. Of the few things I don't care for this movie a lot is some of the transitions are really fast and abrupt. You know, we'll see a shot of David, you know, getting back into the apartment after he locked himself out. And then it just cuts right to a shot where he starts to transition to a werewolf. There's no build up. I would like to have seen something like, you know, he starts to sweat profusely, he starts having aches and pains, he has to start moving around, he gets agitated. We don't really see any of that. We just go right from, hey, I'm sitting in a chair reading a book, to I'm a werewolf, you know, in seconds flat. Now, it's not to say the transition to werewolf was fast. If anyone's ever seen this movie, they know how incredible this transformation scene was. It lasts for several minutes, and you can tell what a painful and horrible process this is for the poor guy. Some of the shots where David goes on his first rampage cuts pretty quick in between segments, and I guess that's understandable. You have a lot to fit in a short amount of time, and some of that stuff did get cut for the theatrical release because of rating issues. It was getting a little too gory for some of the test audiences, so those got toned down some. But so some of that was a little bit abrupt, so that's one of the few problems I might have with this movie. And some of the dream sequences just didn't really fit too much. I like the idea that it showed him kind of losing his grip a little bit. But yeah, some of those might have been able to do without. But anyway, I mean, that's really the only problem I have with this movie. And that's really a really small nitpicky thing. You got to make cuts somewhere, you know, to get it down to a decent runtime. You don't want those kind of things dragging out too long. Now, some things I like. The aforementioned subway scene, that's one of the best scenes ever filmed in horror. You'll know what I'm talking about. If you've never seen the movie and you go watch it, it's an amazing scene. And it goes from claustrophobic to open, But the whole time, this poor guy, he's completely isolated. You know, he's in the middle of one of the biggest cities in the world, and there's no one around him to help. And as this guy slowly gets stalked down, yeah, you just feel his terror, and it's a great scene. I especially love the end where that wolf just slowly appears into the frame while the guy's riding up the escalator. You know, he's totally worn out, he hurt himself, whatever it is, when he fell. And here comes the wolf just creeping up there. But yeah, that's a fabulous scene. Very, very good. I really do like the design choices that John Landis made for the wolf. Of course, with Rick Baker's expertise and vision as well. Even though you don't see it too much in the movie, which is usually the best thing to do with monster movies, it's very outside the normal what you see in a normal werewolf movie. And it's a good design. It definitely elicits fear, a little more primal fear in a person than like a two-footed werewolf, you know. Another thing I like about it is you really, really feel bad for the main character, David. He's a nice guy. He just wants to go have a little fun in Europe with his friend. And one of the first things that happens when he gets there, you know, he's put into a coma. His best friend is, you know, killed in front of him, and he's the one responsible for it. And then he finds out he's responsible for other deaths, and he's going to keep doing it until he kills himself. And, you know, he doesn't want to die. You know, the poor guy just wants to go out and have fun, live his life. He's young, but it's just not meant to be. And he comes across as so nice and funny in the movie that, yeah, you really emotionally invested in him, and you don't want him to croak. But, well, as you know, by the end of the movie, he does. So, not a happy ending, kiddos. So that's good that the movie can actually make you care about a main character that much, especially in, you know, what some consider a throwaway horror movie. You know, you have a lot more empathy for him than you do for many characters in some drama that you're supposed to feel more for. Another great thing was some of the locations used in this film. I particularly like the English rolling countryside they show in the very first couple shots of the movie. They're walking around in these giant open fields out there. It's all green and misty, and it's just beautiful. The little Welsh town that they're in when they wander into the slaughtered lamb, it's a gorgeous little town, and just makes you want to go in there and have a pint and crisps, you know. It's perfect. I didn't like the city shots as much, but, you know, that's to be expected. I like the countryside a lot better. But and the shots were pretty impressive they did in the middle of London, you know, with traffic and explosions going on and the wolf running around out in the open. I mean, that's really impressive, especially, you know, for the time. No CGI. You had to do it all with practical effects and stunt people. So big kudos on that. So anyway, won't make it too long, but I guess the question gets down to, was it actually good? I'd say this movie is very good. It's not great, but very, very good. I don't think there's a whole lot they could have done to make the movie actually great, or much better than it was, other than maybe removing a few of the comedy elements out of it, and focusing a little more on the serious side of things about, you know, poor innocent man turning into a rampaging beast, especially his realization of the fact that is him doing these killings. You know, you could have shown a little more of his internal conflict and gotten a little less humorous at the end, even though the subject matter was getting very serious at that point. You know, his best friend and then his victims, who are also coming back to him in his daymares, telling him he's got to off himself. But I mean, visual effects were great. Great looking film itself. I love the locations. Doesn't look low budget at all, like a lot of horror movies did, especially back in the 80s. Boy, some of those, they look bad. I mean, it's very well acted. So yeah, it's a good movie. Definitely worth a watch. You're no child of the 80s if you haven't watched this movie, and just don't bother with any of its sequels, because you know it's just straight CGI garbage. But yeah, it's a good movie. But I would say probably rent it before you buy it, because it may not be everyone's cup of tea. You know, not everyone likes that basically almost one of a kind mix of comedy and horror there. But in short, just make sure you give this movie a try at some point in your life. If for nothing else, just to see the amazing special effects. Particularly the transformation scenes and the great creature design. And it's a shame we didn't see more of the cast and other things after this movie. But, you know, them's the breaks, what can I say? Well, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Was It Good? If you have any questions, concerns, comments, want to call me a genius, want to call me an idiot, please put something down there in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll be bringing you more content shortly. Also, if you have any suggestions that you would like to see for content, say from the 80s, 90s, be it music, movies, products, maybe even some sort of pop culture, just let me know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to try to get you out some quality content. Alright, until next time, this is Genome, out.